Okay, so moving on. Now that we learned, why the nervous system is important and what's the function of the nervous system, we can move on to our second uh, objective, which is to learn the two divisions of the nervous system. Okay, once again, you guys are going to be familiar with this because this entire lesson is a review. Okay, so remember there's two divisions of the nervous system. You have the central nervous system and you have the peripheral nervous system. Remember the central nervous system consists of the brain and the spinal cord. And the peripheral nervous system consists of the nerves that are distributed throughout our entire body. So the peripheral nervous system is just the nerves that you find throughout our entire body that are going to be connected to our spine, and some of them are also going to be connected to our brain. But the majority of them are going to be connected to our spine. We have a total of 31 pairs of nerves that are going to make up the peripheral nervous system. All right, so you guys should be, familiar with this. Like I said, the nervous system is composed of two divisions. You have the central nervous system that consists of the brain and the spinal cord. You also have the peripheral nervous system. So when I say the peripheral nervous system is the nerves that you find running throughout the entire body, this is what I'm talking about here. Okay, at the center you see the brain and the spinal cord. This is the central nervous system. Now all these little nerves or little lines that you see branching off from the spinal cord, we call those nerves. Okay, so all these different nerves that are branching off from the spinal cord is called the peripheral nervous system. Okay, so let's talk about the central nervous system first. Remember I said the brain is referred to as a control center or the command center. And we already talked about, what the brain is going to be doing. It is going to process information that it receives. And it's also going to transmit instruction to the body. Remember I said earlier that the brain is going to help to control the body. Okay, so remember this little animation here where you have stimuli uh, traveling to the brain through the nervous system. Remember I said the brain is going to process this information and interpret it as vision and sound. And also remember this part here when I said that the brain is then going to send out instructions. It's going to cause an appropriate response. It's going to send instructions through these same nerves to help control the different parts of the body. Okay, so an example of that is, when we're running, the brain is sending our legs and our arms information to help us to run and balance ourselves. Okay, and that's why, I have this picture of this puppet here, the same way how, people try to, I guess, control a puppet by pulling the strings. The brain is basically helping to pull the strings of the body and to help to control the body. Okay, so that's it for the brain. These are two of the main things that the brain is going to do. But as we move, further on, when I do a video on the brain and the spinal cord, that's going to, go more in detail to explain, what else they do. Okay, so now we'll talk about the spinal cord. Now, when it comes to the spinal cord basically helps to relay information. Okay, so what I mean by relay, basically you have information going back and forth. So for example, uh, let's say if someone was to touch your hand, that nerve impulse that's going to be, I guess, created by the nerves inside your hand, that's going to travel along the nerve or through the peripheral nervous system and make its way into the spinal cord. Once it gets to the spinal cord, it's going to send that information to the brain. Okay, and the brain is then going to create another nerve impulse, and it's going to send this back to the spinal cord so that the spinal cord can send this to the body. So basically, you have two things happening. You have information traveling from the hand, into the nervous system and into the brain. And then you have the brain sending instructions back to the spinal cord and back to the hand. So basically, it's going to relay information from the body to the brain, as well as from the brain back to the body. So the spinal cord basically is helping the body and the brain to communicate with one another. It's passing along information back and forth from the brain to the body and from the body to the brain. Okay, so here's a picture or animation that basically shows this. The spinal cord is going to help to send information from the body to the brain, and it's going to help send information from the brain back to the body. Okay, so they're basically helping one another to communicate with each other. Okay, so that's it for the central nervous system. You have two parts. You have the brain and you have the spinal cord. Next, we'll talk about the peripheral nervous system. Remember earlier I said that the peripheral nervous system were all of the nerves that was branching off from the spinal cord. So these nerves branch off from the spinal cord and they connect to different parts of our body. Now with the peripheral nervous system, it is going to send information from the body to the central nervous system. So for example, we have our hands here. If someone was to stick the hand, that information is going to be sent along these nerves and into the spinal cord or the central nervous system. Because remember, the spinal cord is a part of the central nervous system. And once it's time to send information back to the arm, it's going to travel from the central nervous system back into the peripheral nervous system so that this hand will now react to that pain. Okay, so the peripheral nervous system just helps to transmit information between the body and the central nervous system. And also, like I said earlier, it consists of 31 pairs of nerves that's going to branch off from the spinal cord. All right, in addition to that, the peripheral nervous system consists of two branches. Okay, you have the somatic nervous system. This basically deals with voluntary actions. For example, walking. And you also have the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system helps with involuntary actions. So for example, your heart beating or your lungs, breathing, those are some examples of automatic responses or involuntary actions. Another example is sneezing or choking or coughing. Okay, so all of those actions there are going to be controlled by the autonomic nervous system. This basically controls involuntary actions. All right, so both of these divisions are the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system are going to work together to help to control the body. All right, so let's recap what we learned so far. Okay, so basically the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system are going to work together to control the body. So for example, if you wanted to, touch something with your hand, a nerve impulse would start, at your fingertips, and that nerve impulse is going to travel along these nerves or that are a part of the peripheral nervous system into the spinal cord. The spinal cord will then send that nerve impulse to the brain, and the brain is going to interpret that information, and then it might send instructions to do something with your hand. So for example, if you were to touch something, so let's say if you wanted to touch something or if you wanted to pick something up with your hand, the brain is going to send that information or instructions back to your hand so that you can control your hand. You could either move the object or move it away. This is what's going to happen whenever we try to control our hands or move our hands. With this example, this isn't quite a a reflex action, because remember that a reflex action happens a little bit differently. But this is just basically showing how the nervous system generally is going to work. Okay, so if you can see the animation, you see that you can see a nerve impulse traveling along the peripheral nervous system into the spinal cord, into the brain, and then it sends instructions to the hand so that it can move an object or have a certain reaction. But like I said, this is just a general description, of how the nervous system works. Later on in the lesson, we will speak more specifically about reflex reactions, which you guys should already be familiar with. Okay, so now that we've seen a demonstration of how the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system is going to work together to help to control our body, now we're going to talk about how information is going to travel in the nervous system. Now, I probably would have already, mentioned this already, so far with the lesson just from talking about this. But remember, this information is going to travel as a nerve impulse. So here are a few definitions. Most of these definitions you guys are already familiar with, because like I said, this is a review. So with a nerve, for example, this is a special type of tissue that can conduct and transmit electrical signals. A nerve cell, it has a similar definition. It's just a special type of cell that's going to conduct and transmit electrical signals. Now, when I say conduct, basically it's receiving electrical signal. And when I say transmit, it's sending an electrical signal. So nerve tissue or nerve cells, they can do both. They can conduct and transmit electrical signals. Now, if you recall, there are three types of nerve cells. You have sensory, you have motor, and you have relay nerve cells. Now, when it comes to a nerve impulse is an electrical signal that carries information from one part of the body to another. These electrical signals are going to travel along nerves. Okay, so an example of a nerve impulse, we go back to the same video here that I was just showing you guys. This little yellow dot that you see moving, this is a nerve impulse. It's traveling along these nerves. It started in the peripheral nervous system. It makes its way into the central nervous system. Okay, so the nervous system is basically going to help to relay information from one part of the body to the next. It's helping to transmit information. This is going to help our brain or our central nervous system to adapt to our environment, okay? Because we have constant communication with different parts of our body. This is also going to, these nerve impulses are also going to help our body to communicate with one another or control different parts of our body. Okay, so this is how information is going to travel from one place to the next. It's traveling as a nerve impulse. Okay, so you guys can write down these definitions or try to summarize them. Or what you could also do, if it applies to the question, you could, take note of that. So you don't have to keep, I guess, going back and forth in these videos as you watch them. Okay, so let's review what we talked about so far when it comes to how information is going to travel in the nervous system. Okay, so remember, you have the peripheral nervous system and the central nervous system. Okay, these nerve impulses are going to travel along these nerves right here inside the arm in this example right here. Okay, so those little lines that you see through the arm, they are nerves. Okay, inside these nerves, you have nerve cells. Okay, remember I said that you had nerve tissue This is an example of nerve tissue. Remember the definition of tissue is that it's a collection of cells. And the definition of an organ is that it's a collection of different tissues to achieve some type of function. It's a bunch of tissues working together to do a certain job. Okay, so inside these nerve tissue, you have nerve cells, and this is how these nerve cells are going to look. In this example, this picture here, this is a picture of a motor nerve. Okay, so remember that information is going to travel through our nervous system as a nerve impulse. So with the example of this motor nerve cell, you have a nerve impulse or an electrical signal that is traveling through this nerve, and that's going to cause a response in this muscle right here. Okay, so as that nerve impulse, reaches the muscle, it's going to cause it to contract, or it's going to cause some type of movement. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the different types of nerve cells. Okay, so you have three different types of nerve cells. You have sensory nerves, you have relay nerves, you have a number of names for the relay nerve. Sometimes it's called an intermediate nerve, sometimes it's called a connector nerve. Okay, you also have motor nerves. Okay, they're also called neurons, but you could, neurons and nerve cells are interchangeable. Okay, so you can use both. Okay, so this right here, sensory nerve, this right here, relay nerve, and this right here is a motor nerve. Okay, so let's imagine that this, red dot here is a nerve impulse. At the end of this nerve here, you have dendrites. Remember, dendrites are going to receive an electrical signal or some type of stimulus. Okay, so now you'll have a nerve impulse that's traveling along this nerve. So let's imagine this red dot is a nerve impulse. It's going to travel along the sensory nerve through a relay nerve. Usually you find relay nerves inside the central nervous system. So you're gonna find them inside the spinal cord as well as inside the brain, okay? But the main function of a relay nerve is to pass nerve impulses from one nerve to the next. That's why it's called a relay nerve. Think about someone who's running a relay race. It's basically passing a nerve impulse from one nerve cell to the next. Next, you have the motor nerve. Okay, so if this nerve impulse was traveling along this nerve, then it's going to go into the motor nerve. And as we all know, motor nerves help to control our muscles. Okay, so then it's going to go into the muscle, and that's going to cause some type of response. Now, when it comes to sensory nerves are going to detect stimuli. You're going to find these inside of our sense organs. And then it's going to send this information to the central nervous system, or in a majority of the cases, the spinal cord. Okay, and like I said, with the relay nerve, that nerve is just going to send information from one nerve cell to the next. And with the motor nerves, these are going to carry nerve impulses from the central nervous system or the spinal cord to our muscles. Okay, so let's I guess review everything we talked about so far when it comes to the different types of nerve cells. Sensory nerve cells, they are going to detect stimuli and send them to the central nervous system. Now with the sensory nerve cells, you're going to find these inside of our sense organs, okay? So it's basically detecting, a stimuli. That's why I have this picture here. It's going to try to detect sound. It's going to try to detect touch. It's going to detect taste, okay? The same thing with smell and sight. So these sensory nerve cells, we're going to find them inside our eyes. We're going to find them inside the ears. You're going to find them inside your nose. You're going to find them inside the tongue, as well as on our skin. So all of these sensory nerve cells are going to detect stimuli, and then it's going to send them to the central nervous system. Now, with the majority of the cases, it's going to send to the spine, but sometimes it sends it directly to the brain. For example, with the eye, remember you have an optic nerve, that connects the eye directly to the brain. So in that case, that stimuli is going to go directly to the brain. But in a lot of the cases, it's going to go through the spine. But the main takeaway point here is that sensory nerve cells, they detect stimuli, and then they're going to send them to the central nervous system. Okay, so here's our animation that's basically showing that happening. Okay, so with this stimuli here, you have someone that, is experiencing the touch stimuli. Okay, so whenever, you touch something, that's going to create a stimulus inside your hand. That's going to start a nerve impulse. That nerve impulse will travel through this sensory nerve, through the nerves inside the arm. It's going to make its way into the central nervous system. So I'll play that animation again. If you touch something, it's going to start a nerve impulse that travels along these sensory nerves, makes its way into the arm, and then it goes to the brain. So this is an example of how sensory nerves are going to work. Remember, sensory nerves detect stimuli. They're going to detect different stimuli and send this information to the central nervous system. Now with motor nerves, remember I already showed you an animation for this. I'll just skip to the part. The motor nerves are different from sensory nerves. Instead, they're going to carry information from the central nervous system and carry it to our muscles or our glands. Okay, so this is a motor nerve right here. It's going to receive a nerve impulse from the central nervous system, and then it's going to send this to a muscle or a gland. So this is how a motor nerve is going to work. It's sending nerve impulses to the muscle, and it's causing it to respond. And in this case, it's causing it to move. Okay, so motor nerve cells, like I said, carry nerve impulses from the central nervous system to muscles and glands. This is going to cause a response. A response is a change that will occur as a result of that nerve impulse. So an example of a response is that, a muscle is going to move. In a scenario where, if you were to touch something hot and you move your hand away, that's an example of a response. All right, the last nerve cell we're going to talk about is the relay nerve cell. Okay, remember I said the only thing the relay nerve cell is going to do is that it's going to pass nerve impulses from one nerve cell to the next. So let's imagine again that this red dot here is a nerve impulse. You have a nerve impulse traveling along this sensory nerve, and it goes into this relay nerve. Remember I said it has different names. In this case here, they have interneuron, but I'll call it a relay nerve, and it's going to cause this nerve impulse to travel from one nerve to the next. Okay, so imagine this red dot is the nerve impulse, and here it is traveling to the next nerve cell. Okay, so to summarize what I said so far about the different types of nerve cell, we have three types of nerve cells. You have sensory nerve cells, motor nerve cells, and relay nerve cells. Okay, now we're going to talk about reflex actions. But before we talk about reflex actions, I want you guys to, answer each of these questions here, and then you can move on to the next part. Okay, so what is a nerve? Think about what is a nerve. Think about what are the three types of nerve cells. What is a nerve impulse? What does the peripheral nervous system do? And what does the central nervous system do? Now, at the end of this video, you're going to find an assignment. In addition to that assignment, I want you guys to also answer these questions right here. Okay, so here we have a reflex action. Now, we would have talked about this inside class. Remember, a reflex action is an automatic response to a stimulus. Okay, so in this example here, the stimulus is going to be heat or pain. Okay, remember we said with stimulus, you have external stimulus and you have internal stimulus. This is an example of an external stimulus. Remember, a stimulus is a detectable change in the environment. Okay, so with this case here, you have a hot pan. Remember, with a reflex action, if you touch something hot, you're going to automatically pull your hand away. But a number of different things are going to take place inside the nervous system when this happens. Okay, so first you're going to have a sensory nerve that's going to detect the stimuli. Remember I say sensory nerves detect stimuli. So this nerve impulse is then going to travel along this sensory nerve once it would have detected that stimuli. Okay, so once again, follow the red dot. This is the nerve impulse. Then it's going to go into the spinal cord. Okay, so that's what this is right here. This is basically showing a cross section of the spinal cord. Okay, so this nerve impulse goes inside the spinal cord. It's going to go through the relay nerve. Remember what a relay nerve does? It just sends a nerve impulse from one nerve cell to the next. Okay, so this nerve impulse now is going to go into the motor nerve, and that is going to come to this muscle here, and that's going to cause this muscle to contract. That is going to cause this muscle to contract. When this muscle contracts, that's going to cause a response. And in this case, it's going to cause the person to move their hand away from this hot stimulus. Okay, so we also call this muscle an effector. Effectors are organs that are going to respond to stimuli. So once they receive a nerve impulse from a motor neuron, it's going to cause some type of response. In this case, the hand moved away from the painful stimuli. Okay, so here's a summary of what happens during a reflex action. Remember I said a reflex action is an automatic response to a stimuli. Okay, so first you had a stimulus that was detected. Okay, that's going to go into the sensory nerve. Then that's going to travel into the spinal cord or the central nervous system, where it's going to find a relay nerve. The relay nerve is going to pass that nerve impulse to a motor nerve. And this motor nerve is going to cause a response. It's going to send a nerve impulse to the muscle, and that's going to cause the muscle to contract and move away. Okay, another type of reflex actions are called conditioned reflex actions. These are reflexes that are not automatic and are learned. Okay, so for example, walking is an example of a conditioned reflex. We learn to walk when we're babies. We're not born with the information of how to walk. You know, it takes a while for a baby to learn how to walk. It's going to fall over, a couple of times when it's trying it for the first time. And then eventually that baby will learn how to walk. Okay, another example of a conditioned reflex is riding a bike. Think back to the time when you ride a bike for the first time. It would have been hard for you to balance yourself, but with time you learn how to balance yourself. All of your muscles involved with balancing yourself learned to get used to riding a bike, and it learned to basically help to keep your body balanced while you're pedaling. Okay, so that's another example of a conditioned reflex. All right, grade 10G, that's it for this video. I hope you guys take care. Like I said, once you're done with the assignment, just WhatsApp a picture of your answers to me.